Today we're building a Fullstack Taskmanager application using Nextjs and MongoDB. We'll use Axios to make our HTTP requests and Mongoose to query our database. Tailwind CSS and dasiyui will help us with our styling. And we have a few more features that I think you'll enjoy. So we'll start by creating our Next.js project or Next.js app. And we'll use npx to do so. And we'll add latest, and I'm going to name it my app. Feel free to name yours whatever you like. So in this project, we will not be using TypeScript. We'll say yes to ESLint, yes to Tailwind, no to the SRC, yes to the app router, no to import alias, and we'll give this a few minutes to finish installation. And let's cd into the directory. And did it save it? Yes. Now that we're into the directory, now let's install these dependencies. And we'll give it a few minutes to finish up. Okay. And we're not going to do much on our front end for right now, but I do want to just do some simple cleanup. So we'll go into the app, and this is just optional. I like to remove the boiler CSS and set the overflow and the X to hidden. And we'll go into the layout, and I'll keep the custom font for now. We may change it. And we'll go into our page.js, and let's remove the boiler code within it. And we'll just type in homepage just to have something there on the screen. So let's just test it just to make sure there isn't any issues, but it should be fine. And we'll go back into my app, and we'll go npm run dev. And we'll give it a few minutes to load up. And we'll go to localhost. I think this is 3000, yeah. Okay, see we have our home page. So let's start by connecting to our database first. And let's create a file name .env. Well, first, before we create it, let's go into our gitignore. And let's add our .env file to our gitignore files. This is just to make sure that this file is not included in our Git repo as we upload our information to Git. And then let's create a file named .env. This is where we store our MongoDB connection string that we'll set up in just a moment. But first, let's add a directory or a folder named lib. And within it, let's add a file named db.js. And I'm going to just paste this information in. This is just boiler code that you can type in just for the connection. I'm not going to type it out and risk the error, but feel free to copy it. And I'll also have the Git repo in the description as well once we're finished. So no worries there. So we will need this .env variable, which is mongo_URL. This will be the database This will hold the database connection string that we're going to set up in just a moment. So we'll go ahead and add it to our .env file. And log into our account. In just a few seconds. And let's go to new project. And we'll name this one task, my task manager. Okay, and we'll just keep the same project owner. And we'll go to create a database. And I'm going to use the free tier. And I have the region closest to me. And we'll just go to create. And I'm going to just use the generated password, and I'll put it here to remember it. And we'll go to create user, and let's just click finish. And we now have our cluster set up. So I'm going to use the connection string provided by MongoDB that's listed here. And we'll copy this to our mongo underscore URL. This really should be URI, but URL is fine. And I'm going to grab the password created. And we'll delete this and save the file. And that should care for our initial connection to MongoDB. And we have our connection string here as well. So now that we have those two things in place, let's go ahead and create the models for our application. So we'll create a new directory named models, and within it, the first model we'll need is a user model. And this is just so that we can store our users in the database. So we'll start by importing mongoose from mongoose. And the first schema will be named a user. Well, it'll be a user schema, User schema is equal to new mongoose. Dot schema, and we don't need to store much within this. If I spell it right, it won't give me an error. There we go. We don't need to store much for our users. I'm just going to grab the email, and we'll say type of string. And we'll say that it's required to true. And we'll say unique true as well. And this is just a personal task manager, so feel free to customize it any way you want. You could assign tasks if you want to have multiple users log in, but just want to store the users that we create. And we'll grab the timestamp as well. We'll set that to true. And let's make sure that we export this so that it could be used throughout our application. And we'll say mongoose.models.user or mongoose.model user MODEL. And this should be mongoose. Sorry, having a tough time typing this morning, looks like. And this will be user schema. Okay, so if we save, that should care for the storage of our users in our database. Next, let's set up the actual task within the models. And these are the tasks that we will use to create and add and edit and display the tasks that we need to get done throughout the day. So we'll go import mongoose from mongoose. And we're going to name this one just regular task schema. That's the task schema is equal to new mongoose.schema. And we'll say these have a title. And we'll set it to as a type of string. We'll say required true. Okay, and next we want to have a description. So we'll say disk type of string required true. Okay. Yeah, we don't need this. Come here, let's put it here. And we'll set the status, and this will be so that we can see what the status of each task is. And we'll make the type string required true. And so the first one would be open. Then we'll have one for closed. And we'll have one for progress. And we'll want to grab the timestamp as well. Let's set it to true. And let's be sure that we export it. Export default mongoose dot models dot task or mongoose dot model task, and this will be task schema. Okay, and let's give this a once over. Everything looks pretty good. Okay, so with our models cared for, let's go ahead and set up our APIs. So because we're using the app router, within the app directory, let's create a folder named API, and all of our backend requests will be within this folder. So the first the first API that we want to set up is for our task. So I'll add a directory named task, and within it we'll add a file named route.js. Now within the API directory, let's add another directory. This one will be stats, and this is just going to show a quick overview of the amount of users we have, the amount of tasks in total we have, and the status of each. So inside of stats, let's add a file named route.js. And then the last API directory we'll set up will be for authentication. This is totally optional. But I just want to add some Google OAuth or authentication so that we can restrict access to our task. So within API, we're going to add a directory named auth. And within auth, let's add another directory with the name of bracket, open bracket, 3 dots, next, auth, close bracket. And then within it, let's add a file named route.js. So within this file, and we'll set the first route within this file. This will be the first one that we build. Within this will be our connection to NextAuth that's going to allow authentication, and we're going to use the Google OAuth to set up our authentication. So before we set up Google, let's just go ahead and add in a few dependencies here. First, we'll import NextAuth. And with this setup, we'll want to go ahead and do a few more things to get our application up and going. So first, let's start by setting up our Google client provider. So I went ahead and logged into my account and began the process of setting up a OAuth consent screen. So I'm going to do a external screen, and I'm going to name this application task, and we'll use the email that's listed here. And we don't need to have any of the information listed there. Okay. And add and remove scopes. No, we're not going to grab any additional information from that. And let's just go ahead and click save. Back to the dashboard, and let's set up our credentials. Create credentials. There we go. It's been a while for this one. This is a web application, web 1. So within our origins, let's add in http://localhost. Localhost, yep. And then here, We'll add in localhost, and let's add in 3000. And we'll put http://localhost 3000 /API/auth callback/Google. And we'll verify this once we set up the Google authentication through nextauth. And for this one, it should be just localhost. So let's just grab this. And let's just save our screen, and you should have your client ID and your secret. Now, look, don't copy my client ID. Just follow the steps and set up your own. It's free. And I'll take this down eventually, but that's how you set it up. So now let's go to nextauth, and let's grab what we need to set up Google, and go to nextauth. Yep, right here, localhost auth callback Google. That's not it. This is it right here. Let's just make sure that's what we keyed in. I tell you what, let's just copy it to be sure, because sometimes I will just do this. Save. All right. And we're going to use Google as our provider. So within this file, let's type in const handler is equal to nextauth. And we can just go back to providers, copy it here, and we're going to store this information in our .env file. And let's grab the secret as well. And we'll go back to our credentials. Here's our client ID. And the secret is within here. Grab our secret here. Okay. And let's close this file out. Okay. So that cares for the providers. Now I want to use the adapter as well. That way it'll save to MongoDB. So, we'll need to bring in the provider right here. And let's go to the adapter, and we'll need to set up the client promise. So let's copy this. Let's go to lib, and let's create a directory within lib that's going to store this information. So we'll call it client promise just to keep it consistent. .js, excuse me. And we're not using TypeScript, so we can remove this, but everything else pretty much remains the same. More boiler code the same way with our database connection. So let's just close it out. Make sure we save this file. So this is saying Mongo, and this is where just need to double check. So remember, we named ours URL, not URI, so we can just change it there, and we'll change it there and save. Let's just make sure I didn't miss anything. DB underscore URI right there. Let's change that to an L, right? Mongo underscore URL. Yeah. Okay. So with that, we can close this out and go back to nextauth, and let's import the client promise, because we're going to need that according to the documentation. So let's import client promise, And the adapter is used here. So we can actually add it here. And let's see, do we need anything else? We have this, we'll need the adapter itself. And we'll save that. So with these items cared for, now we can move on to setting up the connection, setting up the button that so that we can have the login with Google OAuth. So let's go ahead and create a place to store it. So we're going to add a directory named components. And within components, let's add a file named navbar. And within this is going to control our logging in and logging out for the application. Instead of setting this up to be server-side authentication, we're just going to keep it simple. Since it's just a simple personal application, we'll set our authentication up to be on the client side. So before we do this, we'll need to wrap our application in the session. So let's go ahead and add a file named sessionprovider.js. First, we'll need, we can keep the session provider. We'll need to set this as a client-side app. So use client. Then let's go const provider is equal to, and we're going to pass in the children as a prop and the session. That way it can be used throughout the application. Nope, this should be a parentheses. And within this, let's just add session provider. And we're going to go with session. And within this, we'll go children. And don't forget to export it. And we'll call this provider. Make sure I didn't misspell anything. Okay, that looks good. Now we'll need to wrap our layout with the new provider. So we can remove it momentarily. Clean this up a little bit. Provider. And then let's store the children. And if we save this, that should take care of it. Now let's go back and let's add in the authentication just to make sure that it works. So now let's go back to our navbar. And this is going to be a client-side component, obviously. And we'll need to bring in a few items. So we'll start with the RFC template. And importing React is fine. Let's bring in use session. We want to use sign in, and this is going to come from next off, and we want to use sign out, and this is from next. Excuse me. From next -auth/React, and we're going to need link because this is going to link us to one other page within our application. And within the navbar component, we're going to need to grab the data from the next off session object. And this is basically just the structure in it so that we can grab some information within that session. And then within the return statement, let's just update the tags to header. And I'll worry about styling this in just a moment. For right now, I just want to make sure that the session is working. So we'll put a div here and we'll put link. We'll call this, well, it needs an href. We'll call it to go back to home. We'll call it Task Manager. And inside of the div, excuse me, let's add another div. This is going to hold a couple of links in our session. So we'll start by saying session. Sorry about that. And we'll need, if there's a session, let's add in a we want to see the user that's signed in, so we'll go session.user.email. And we also want the ability to go to the task page. And we haven't created it just yet, and that's okay. We'll create it later. And that is going to show task. And this will indicate, or this is assuming that the user is logged in. So let's add a button, and we'll set the onClick method to sign out. Here we're going to use that from nextoff, and we'll need to call it. And outside of this, let's just add in the word sign out. And right here, if we are not logged in or we don't have a session, what we should see is a button to sign in. So let's add button. We'll go sign in. And right here, we'll add the onClick handler. And we'll go with sign in. Okay. Let's save this file. MongoDB URL. I see we're getting an error here. Let's see what we have. MongoDB. I bet it's not named MongoDB. That's fine. Let's just name this MongoDB. Save it. Let's go to our database here, and let's just add in DB. MongoDB there. I don't think we need it anywhere else, but let's just be sure. Mongoose, yep. Mongoose. Yep. That's fine. Okay, that should take care of everything. So let's take a look at our app. Well, we'll need to add it to our layout so that it is consistent throughout the page. So underneath provider, just type in open or the less than sign, a capital N for nav. And as you begin to type in navbar, you should be able to import it from components and add in the closing tag. If we go back to our local host, we see that we have task manager and sign in. If we click on sign in, it's saying that the page is not working right now. So let's see why we're getting this error. API off. No handlers. Duh. Sounds like I didn't export it. Sorry about that. So right here, you'll need to export the get and post handlers in order for this to work. My apologies for leaving it out, but it's pretty simple. So you just type in export handler, and we want as get, and we want handler as post. Now let's try this again. Let's go back, refresh, sign in with Google, and I'm gonna do, of course, with the JADAD, and boom, we see we're signed in. So we have our Google authentication set up. So we are fully signed in into the app. And let's see. Now with this, we can style our nav bar a little bit. So I'm going to use dasiyui. Oh, we need to add the nextoff secret as well. Let's do that. Where is it? I believe it's just nextoff _ secret. I know it's in here somewhere. Let's just do this one because we're going to need this one as well. Let's go with, and we'll make this http://localhost 3000, and we'll go nextoff _ secret. And just type in anything. Just save it. All right, we're good to go. No warning there. Perfect. And close out our .env file. So now let's style the nav bar just a little bit. We're not going to do much right now because we still need to finish setting up our backend. But if you're like me, it'll kind of kill you to see it with no style. So within the header, and this is optional, nothing really relevant to the functionality of the site, I like to add some padding on the X, a little bit of padding on the Y. Let's save it. And I'll tell you what, let's make this so that we can see it on both screens. And it's a little easier to view. We can see what we're making at the same time. So I'm going to set this up here. And I'll come back here. Okay. And we have our padding on the X and the Y. Oh, I just hit it right there. So within this div, this will hold our nav link and the links to sign in and sign out. So we'll give it a class name. We'll call it flex, justify, justify between. We'll set the max width to screen. Let's go XL. And we'll say MX auto. That way the screen is centered. If we save it, we see we have an adjustment. And if we maximize the screen, we see that we have the Task Manager logo or link to the home page listed here. And on the right, we have the user that's signed in, task, and to sign out. So now let's style this a little bit. So within this div, let's add a class name of flex. And this should put the items side by side. Yep. And within this p tag, let's add a class name of margin right 4. And within this button, we're going to do the same. And don't forget about the link listed here. Actually, we really didn't need to put it on the button now that I realize, because that's just taking it off the end of the page. So let's just remove this one since it's by itself. And as you can see, we now have a little bit of margin on the right to each of the links so they're not bunched up together. And that cares for it. So now let's go back to our APIs and let's finish setting up the rest of them. So we're good with the authentication portion. And remember, we're going to use client-side authentication in this app. So we're not going to add any extra functionality to the login or authentication API. So within this file, this is going to hold our task. So we want the ability to, of course, all CRUD ability. So we want the ability to create, read, update, and delete our task. So within this file, the route.js, this is going to be the API endpoint of API/task. So let's start by importing the database connection. And let's also import the task model. And let's just make sure that our adapter and our connection is working properly. So before we finish this out, I'm sorry, let's go back to our MongoDB connection. And if we go to database, browse collections, we'll see, we see our user that we just signed in with, excuse me. And we also have the session being stored as well, which is great. Now, we're going to make this a personal task manager, but you also have the ability to add in additional users, assign tasks to users, etc., and also provide roles. If that's something you're interested in, just let me know. I'll be happy to set that up as well. Otherwise, we'll just stick with what we have and keep this as a personal task manager versus one that is scalable to multiple users. So we'll minimize this screen, and back in our API task endpoint in the route.js, we brought in our database connection, we brought in the task model. The first request we want to make is a GET request. So we'll export async function, we'll say GET, and we'll put the request. And within this, we want to start with our connection to the database. So we'll go db.connect. And then we'll have a try-catch block. So right here, we'll create a variable named task. And we're going to say await. because we want to await that connection to the database task, which is grabbing the model task to see what do we have in our database. And we basically just want to go find. And within it, we want to return an empty object. This is going to allow all of the tasks to accumulate within this task variable. And then once we grab the task, we want to return it back to the browser, so we can do something with it. So we'll go return new response. And this will be JSON.stringify. And we want to pass in the variable task, which should be all tasks. And this, of course, will have a status of 201, which means everything went well. And within the catch portion within the catch portion for our error, if we get an error, let's return new response. And this will be JSON.stringify. And we'll pass in null just to keep it simple. And here we'll go status of 500. So this is going to care for the GET request. Now we'll need a way to, this is going to care for the GET request, which will be to get all tasks out of the database. Next, we'll need a way to create tasks. So we'll go export async function post. And we'll go await db.connect. And we'll add a try catch block. And we'll start by adding a variable named new task, and we'll set it equal to await task dot create. And we want to create the body, and I need to grab the body first. Await rec.json. So this is going to grab the data from the body and convert it into JSON. Then once we grab it from the body, we want to store it in a variable named new task so that we can map it to our task model and save it within the database. If all goes well, we want to return new response, JSON.stringify new task. And we want to set the status to 201. And if we get an error, return new response, JSON.stringify null. And we'll set the status to 500. So if we want, we can actually test these now to see if it's working. So I'm going to use Thunder Client to keep it simple. This is just an extension from VS Code. You can use Postman or Insomnia. There's a few other you could actually create a quick little front end and test it if you wanted to as well. But I'm just going to keep it simple and keep it here. And let's see. Let's remove this. Let's just go with task and see what we get. We see that we get status code of 200, which means that the GET request is working. And if we go with the POST request, let's go body. And I think we had a title. Let's go test. And the script. Let's go test the script. And status. Let's go with open. And you have to make sure the casing matches the casing in the model we created. And I'm pretty sure we kept all of the first letters capitalized and the other letters lowercase. Feel free to do it however you like. But just make sure you change this to a post request and make sure you set the API or make sure you set the endpoint to API/task. And if we click send, boom, you see we get status code of 200 indicating that the task was created. And now let's go back to a GET request to make sure we get this task. And if we hit send, you see we get the update that the status is 201, and we see the task that we just created. So we see that that is working. Okay, so now that we have those two endpoints updated, let's add in 2 additional endpoints to delete and update a route. So let's go back to this folder, and within the task, because we would want to delete and update a task individually, we'll need to create a way to have our task identified uniquely. So I'm going to use a ID, and the way we'll do it with the app router is you'll do a bracket, ID, and then close bracket, and this tells Next.js that we're looking for a ID after the API/task endpoint for an individual task. And within the ID directory, let's add a file named route.js. So this is going to represent a individual task, which is going to allow us to get it individually, delete it individually, and to update it. So let's start by importing our database. And then we'll also need our task model, the same way we did in our get, or same way we did, in our get and post endpoints. And let's create a way to get each task individually. So let's go export async, function. And this is going to be a get request. And we'll also need to pass in, so within the parentheses, this is going to be a request, but we'll also need to pass in CTX, which is going to represent that it's going to be a individual ID that we'll be passing in or that we should be capturing. And within this function, we'll always start with our database connection, and we'll add a try-catch block. And first, we'll need to grab the ID so that we can work with it. So we'll go const ID is equal to ctx.params.id. And then within the try-catch block, we'll go const task is equal to await task.findById. And once we find it, we want to return new response. And this will be json.stringify. We'll pass in task because that's what we want to return to the browser. And all goes well, let's return status of 200. Else, we'll go return new response. json.stringify. We'll just go with null. And we'll go status of 500. Okay. Ooh, where did this error come from? All right. So this is going to take care of the get task by ID. Now we'll need a way to update our task. So we'll use a put request for it. So we'll go export async function put, and we'll go rec and ctx. And we'll start with our database connection, db.connect. And we might as well just copy this from here. And let's add in a try-catch block. And we're going to need this again, so I might as well just copy it. Okay, and within the try-catch block, let's start by grabbing the data from the body. So we'll go const body, await, and we'll go request.json. And underneath it, let's create a variable named update task. And we'll set it equal to await the task model. And we want to find the task by its ID and update it. And we want to be able to update it with the information from the body. So we'll go set, and we want to destructure the body. And outside of it, we're going to set new to true. And this is basically just saying that this is that the information we're getting is new, and that's what we want to use to update the body or update the task, excuse me. And then once, if all goes well, we'll go return new response. And we'll go JSON.stringify. And we'll pass in updated task. And we'll go with status of 500. 200. This is a good thing, not bad. Well, success, it's not failure. And if it doesn't work out, now we'll do return new response, JSON.stringify. We'll go null, and we'll set the status to 500. It helps if you put that first. Okay. So let's go ahead and test this one out. And I could have just kept it open. We don't need to open that. Let's go to Thunder Client. And we'll go back to where we were. So in order to get an individual task, we do have our get route set up, right? Let me make sure. Yep. So in order to get an individual task, we'll need the ID of that task. So here's the ID. Let's change the endpoint to get API/ID. And if we click send, it's not gonna let me do it. I need to remove. Let's change this to delete, because that's what it will be. Okay, and if we go back to Thunder Client, we are getting an error. Okay. So let's go back to API. We'll go delete. Let's just comment this out for right now. Go get. And we get a status of 200, the individual ID. So now let's change this to a put request to make sure that the updates work. So let's go test update, updated, test description, updated. And let's just change the status to closed. Did I put close or close? Let's make sure close with a D. Because if it's not accurate, it will throw an error. And we see that it is now updated. And if we go to our database, we see we have our task. In addition to, we see the updated description and title. So now the last endpoint we'll need to create is our, there we go, delete. So we already have the template or the boiler to start the code listed here. So let's create a variable name. Task, and let's set it equal to await task find by ID. And underneath it, let's go await task find by ID and delete. And we can just return new response, JSON.stringify. Delete it. MSG, yep. And then we'll set the status. Actually, I messed up right here. This should be within. That's why I'm getting that error. And then you come outside of it. And sorry about that. We'll just pass in here status 200. And we'll go return new response, JSON.stringify, go null, status 500. Okay, make sure I didn't mess anything up there. Okay, so now if we go back to this API endpoint and we go to delete, It says deleted. And if we go to database, we see we have nothing there. Okay, so the last endpoint we want to set up with our application is going to be to display the actual stats of our, or the data, or the stats within our MongoDB cluster. So let's go back to we can close these out. So let's go back to our API directory, and within the stats folder, let's click on the file name route.js. And within this will hold the endpoints to capture the data of our stats. So first, we'll start by importing our DB. And we'll also import user. That way we can see how many users we have. It should just be a personal task manager, but if you want a family member to use it, you'll have the ability to see how many users are signed up. And we'll also bring in the task models. And here we'll go export, and this is going to be a GET request, async function GET. And then we'll pass in a request. So first, we'll always start with a connection to our DB. And we'll add a try-catch block. And we'll start with, user count will be equal to await user.count documents. And next we'll need is a way to capture the total task. Total task count is equal to await task.count documents. Now we'll need a way to capture the open task. Open task count is equal to await task.count docs. Okay. Next, we want the closed, or do we call it close or complete? I can never remember what I call close. But I think it's called, we'll just call it complete. Close task count is equal to await task dot count docs, and we'll need to pass in the names in just a second, but I'm just going to go ahead and create these first. And we'll need to the last one to be progress, so we'll call it progress task count is equal to await task.count documents. And here we'll need to create a variable that stores everything, so we'll call it stats is equal to all of the variables that we just created. So user count, total task count, open task count, close task count, progress task count. And we'll go return TRN new response JSON.stringify stats. And we'll set the status to 200 if all goes well. And if we get an error, we'll go return new response JSON.stringify null status 500. So within each of these, what we want to, not each of these, but what we want to pass in for our statuses, we want to pass in a status. We want to pass in the status so that it knows what to look for and what to capture. So we'll go status, SATUS of open. And let's make sure we change this to capital O. STATUS, yep. And here we can just copy this. We'll go status of close. And we'll go status of progress. And it'll help if you put this in parentheses. That's why it's giving us that error. I mean in brackets, excuse me. Sorry about that. And here, let's do the same. Okay. Now let's go back to good old Thunder client and test this out. PI task. And we won't see anything except for a user at this point because status of 200. Okay, so it looks good. So now what we can do is with this cared for, we can go ahead and work on displaying this data on our front end, and we'll go ahead and work on that next. All right, so now let's focus on setting up our front end, and we're going to need a few dependencies in order to complete our application. So first, we're going to go npm I, and I think we've already installed it. I could check, but we're going to install Axios. We're going to use dasiyui. So let's dasiyui, and let's go with install. And there's a UI, okay. And I also want to use the a different editor versus the normal standard editor. And I think we're going to use one from React. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It is, simpleMD editor. The React editor. Where's this thing at? I think it should be easymd npm. Yeah, that's it. And hold on, let me expand this out. No, this isn't it. It is simpleMD editor. I think this is it. Yep. And we may add in toast notifications later, but I think for right now, this should be enough to get us going. If we need anything else, we'll always come back. Icons, duh. Let's install those now as well, because I like to have a few icons. npm I, React icons. All right, we're clear. Terminal still going. Okay, cool. So first, I know we'll need the plugin for dasiyui. Let's just go here. There's a tailwind. And you can remove this. I'm not using the background image, but if you want, keep it if you like. And let's save our file. In this file, we're going to start by bringing in the use client, and we'll go RFCE, task list. And actually, let's just change this from a div to a section, task list. And let's go back to, we have it in the task page right here. And I want to add it under task underneath that div. And we see we have it listed there. Perfect. All right. So now within the task list, let's bring in some imports. Let's bring in use effect and use state. This is going to help us manage the state of the file for our task list. And we'll bring in use state there. We'll also need link because we want to have the ability to click on a task and it redirect to the individual task page. So we'll go import link. We'll also need axios. So within the task list function, let's start by grabbing our task, and we'll go set task. And this is going to be equal to use state. And we want to pass this in an empty array, because this is going to store all. And I also want the ability to filter because we aren't going to do it. We could have done this client or server side, excuse me, but because we're not, I'm going to set it up to filter client side. So we'll go filter and we'll go set filter. And we're going to use state, of course, state. And we'll start with a all, because we want the filter state to start with all tasks to be displayed first. Obviously, once you click on it, you could change it, but this will work for right now. So first, let's create a function to fetch all tasks. So we'll go const fetch task, not each, fetch, F-E-T-C-H, task. And we'll make this an asynchronous function. And we'll go try catch block. And within it, we want to start by grabbing the response. So we'll go const response is equal to await axios dot get, because this is a get request. And we're going to get the items from /API/task, because that is the endpoint we created. And then we want to set the task. We want to pass these tasks into this array. So we'll go response.data. And if we get an error, we'll just console.log error getting task. It's got that plural. And let's just pass in the error there. And next, we would want to fetch the task, and we want to store them within the array. So next, we'll want to use use effect here. And we'll go here, and we'll go fetch task, calling this function listed here within use effect. And we'll want to store those inside of an empty array. And with that, let's go ahead and make sure that we can, let's just go ahead and create the filter function as well. So we'll go const handle HINDLE filtered change, and we'll listen out for the event. And we'll go set filter e.target.value. All right. And then let's create a variable that will actually handle the filtering and what it should look like. So we'll go with filtered filtered task. So I guess it, and we'll go filter if it equals all. Then we want to show task, or we want to say task.filter, and we want for each task, we want to go task dot status is equal to filter. And yeah, I know I have an error right here. And we'll say task. Let me see. Task.filter. Task.filter. Task is, this should be an arrow. Yup. Task is equal to the status. Yup. Filter equal all. Or task filter, task status. Okay. Perfect. All right. This should care for us. So now within the return statement, let's start by giving our section a class name of padding the X and Y. And we'll go H2. Well, before I set those up, let's just make sure this is working first. So let me go with a table, and we'll give it a class name of width full border collapse. And within it, we'll need a T head for the table head. And we'll need a TR for as a table row. And the first row, so this initial row is going to have the headers for our table. So we'll go table head, class name of border gray. And I'm just going to set it to 300. This is just for styling, so feel free to set yours to whatever you like. And call this one title. Okay. And we'll list those there. And this will go title, description, DESCR, yeah, that's it. And then status. Okay. And that will conclude the table head. Now underneath, let's add a table body. And let's go with filtered task dot map. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to need to do this first. Filtered task dot map. How did I spell this? Let's just grab it from here. Okay. Filtered task dot map. So we want to map over each, and we want to set the name to task. And for each task, we want to create a table row that displays the data, that displays the title, the description, and the status. So we don't have anything in our database currently. So let's go TR for table row, and we'll close that there, and we'll set the key to task dot ID. That way React isn't upset with us. And then for the table data, let's just pass in task.title. And let me create a task really quick so that we can see. Sorry about that. Here, and go back there. And API task, let's go post. And we can just delete this. And let's change this to open. Just create it there. And we see we have the test, which is here. Okay, so it is displaying the data on our page, so that is working properly. Perfect. So let's just go ahead and clean this up a little bit, style it, and get it looking as we want. So we'll go class name, border, And we'll go border gray and set it at 300. And right here, I'll add in another one for the description. I think with DSC. Yep. And we'll add in another one for the status. Okay. And I think we can go text center. Yeah, let's go text center so it's not to the left. Okay. All right. And grab that. Ooh. Don't yell at us. Oh, okay. I see why, because I have an extra. There we go. All right. There we go. So now it is displaying the data from the database. So I think we will add one more status. You know what? Instead of showing the description, I think what we'll do is we'll just show the title, the status, and update. So let's go status. Let's go update right here. That way we'll have a link to the individual page. So let's go status. And then right here, we can keep the table data, and let's just change this from it to a link. And clean that formatting up a little bit. So within this link, what we want is if we click on the update, let me just add update so we can see it. Update. If we click on update, what we want, it needs an href. What we want is the ability to go to the individual task page, the same way we did when we created the API endpoint. So that endpoint for this, it actually won't be those. It'll be the backticks /task /task and the $, and we'll go task dot underscore ID. And if we save that, all right, and we don't have this page created just yet, but we can add it really quickly. So we'll just go back to task, we'll go to ID, and then we'll go to page.js, and we'll just add something so that we can have something on the screen to make sure it's working. Use client, RAFCE. Let's see, we'll call this single task. And we'll go section, single. Let's just see if it routes to this page. And we were in task list, yeah. Okay, so we see it is routing to the individual task page. So we'll come back and make sure that it's passing in that individual data. But for right now, let's just add in a little bit of styling there. We don't need much. So we'll go back to task. And actually, you know what? We look at it, it's actually okay. Maybe add a little bit of padding, but it's fine. And I'll do that. Padding Y2. There we go. Okay, so we now have the ability to display all tasks. Next, we want to add in we want to add the new task form. We want to add our stats. And we also want to add some filtering right here so that we can filter the task by the status. So we'll work on that next. Okay, so now that we have our task being displayed on the task page, let's go ahead and build in the stats bar. And then after the stats, we'll add in the filter. So Let's see. Well, does it make sense to do that first, or should we? I say, well, let's do the filter, and then we'll come back and do the stats. So with the filter system, just above the table, let's add a div. And inside of this div, let's give it a class name. And we'll give it a class name of margin bottom 4. That way we'll have a little bit of separation because we're going to have the new task button listed here. Sorry, let me, a little bit of background noise. Let me cut it down. There we go. So right here, let's start with a label. And inside of the label, we'll go HTML4. And we'll set the 4 equal to filter. FILTER. Sorry. There we go. And inside of this label, we're going to put filter for status. FIL for status. And save it. And we see we have it listed here. Great. Okay, now underneath it, we're going to add in a select so that we can have selection options. And we'll go with, inside of select, let's start by giving it an ID of filter, which coincides with the label. And we'll give it a name of filter. And we'll add a value filter as well. And this looks good. Now inside of the select, we want to have some options. So we'll go option. And first one will be for all. And I'll put a value. No, we need it this way, of all. Let's save it. And we see we have it listed here. And I'm just going to copy this and paste it in 3 more times. And the first one, we can name it first one, whichever one we want. I'm going to make it this open. And don't forget to, if you're following along, to make that O capitalized. And we'll change this to open. And this one will be closed. I think that's how we named it. And we'll just name this closed. And the last one will be progress. Okay, so we'll save this. And right now we see the options are appearing. So if we go to progress, let's save it because it's not, let's save it here. Okay, it's not letting us select it just yet. May have missed something. A second. Let's see. I think, why is it not moving? Let's see. Filter, label, select, value. Inside of the select, label 4. Let's see. Oh, I need to add the handler, duh. On change handler that we created here. Handle filter change, duh. Now, let's go to close. We see nothing. Let's go to progress. We see nothing. And if we go to open, we see that listed there. So let's just add in a couple more with different statuses to make sure it's toggling correctly. So I'll name this one test 2 with a description of test 2. And we'll change the status to closed. Yep. And if we come here, let's just refresh. We see test 2 appearing, we see close. And if we go to open, close disappears. If we go to close, open disappears. We'll go back to all. Okay, great. Now let's add one for progress as well too. And we'll make this test 3. Okay, and it's created successfully. Let's change the status. You see close. Oh, sorry. Let's refresh. We see test 3 appears. We see progress, close, open. If we go to open, it filters. If we go to close, it filters. And if we go to progress, it filters. Okay, so great. We have our filter status or filter functionality working. So let's go ahead and add in a simple little dashboard right here. That way we'll have the ability to display the stats of our task from the database within the window. So within the components directory, let's create a new file named stats.js, excuse me. And we'll go here. And this is going to be listed on the task page as its own components. So back in the task page itself, we have the div that is set to hold the task. So we'll go ahead and import it now. No, hold on a second. Sorry, we need to make it a component first, give it some functionality, use client. And for right now, we'll just go RFCE just so we can have something on the page. Let's update this to a section. Let's go stats, save it. And let's go back to the task or the task directory page.js. And we'll just bring that in now. Yep, as a component. Let's close it, save it, and we see it listed here. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I really could have made this its own component because we're basically just reusing this so that it's formatted within the maximum screen size of our application. So just copy this because we're going to use this again within the stats window. And we'll go to the section tag, add a class name, and paste it in. And now we see the stats are listed here within the middle of the window. So we can go ahead and let's remove this information. I'll tell you what, let's remove the stats. And let's start with a few imports. So we know we'll need use effect and use state. And use state. And let's bring in axios because we'll need to make a HTTP request to the stats API. And we're going to use some React icons. So we're going to use the user icon. It's easier to do it this way. Sorry. React. I don't remember them by heart. React icons. And I'm using FA. So we'll go back. So I want to do user. I think it is FA user. Yep. And we're going to use FA task. Yep. All right. And I think we'll start with, you know what? I don't want it centered. Let's change this to give it some padding on the X. And that should, let's see. It should already be, okay, perfect. All right, and we can remove that D. So let's start by adding in a div and, well, a H2. That way we can have just a little header that says the database stats. Database stats. And we'll style it a little bit. We'll give it a class name, and we'll make the text 2XL. We'll go with a light font, margin top 4, margin bottom 4. Let's save that. Yeah, I think that looks good. So underneath this H2, let's create a div, and this div will hold our content and the icons. So we'll give it a direction of flex, and we'll like the items to be justified between. We'll give it a gap of 4. We'll give it some margin on the x-axis. We'll make it, well, excuse me, we'll give it margin. We'll set the margin to auto, not x-axis, I'm sorry. And we'll give a little bit of padding as well. Let's save it. And we're going to need another div. And within this div, we'll give it a class name. And we'll set the background to white. We'll give a little bit of padding of 4, rounded large. On hover, well, let's just do this for right now, and then we'll add in a little bit of effect because I want to make sure we see what we're doing and not just typing. So this div will hold the actual icon. So and we're going to have the icon with numbers. So just bear with me. We'll go class name. We'll say flex. Items will be centered, and we'll give it a margin bottom of 2. And here we'll have the FA user, and we'll give this a class name. We'll set the text to 2XL maybe. We may change that. We'll set, we'll make it blue, text blue, and we'll make it 400. Feel free to customize this any way that you like, and we'll give a little bit of margin right as well. And let's close this, save it. And we see we have the user icon presented, so that's great. And now underneath it, let's add in the total users. So we just for styling purposes, we'll set the text to XL, or to large rather, and we'll set the font to semi-bold, simpleMD. Give a little bit of margin right. And we'll say total users. And we know this, the answer to this should be 1, so we see it presented here on the screen. And underneath it, let's add a p tag, and let's go. Nope. Boom, boom. And we'll need to bring in the functionality to go get the stat information. So right here we'll have, we'll go stats. We'll just go user count. User count. Stats.user count. We're probably gonna get an error for doing this. Yep. So let's just bring this back, and we'll comment this part out so we don't have an error and React doesn't scream at us. Okay. Right here we'll go const stats, and we'll go set stats, and of course this is use state. We'll set it to null, indicating that there are no stats, and we'll do use effect. And here we want to go axios.get, and that endpoint is API/stats. Yes, API stats, and then we'll do .then, and we'll say we're getting back a response, and we'll set the stats to response.data, and we'll need to capture that data in an array, and so we'll place it here, and we'll just say if no stats, let's return div class name text center loading stats, and let's go right here. Perfect. We know we have 1 total user. So that is what's being presented now. So we'll need to do the same thing for the additional stats. So I'm going to copy that information. I'm just going to copy what we have here and just paste it in. So start with the div that ends or that begins with the background color, and you see it highlighted here. So let's grab and copy. Well, let's copy from the bottom up. And underneath this div, we'll add we'll add a space, and then we'll paste in the second div. And let's change this from total users. Well, first let's change the FA user to task. And we'll change it from total users to total task. And we'll go with right here, instead of it saying user count, remember we named it total task count. And we see 3 and it's displaying 3. Perfect. So now we'll copy this div again. And once we copy it, we'll go underneath the copied div, the closing tag of the copied div, add a little space, and I'll bring this up so it's easier to see. And right here we have total task. Let's change this to open task. And here we'll change this to open task count instead of total. Let's save it. And we see we have 1, which is the amount of tasks amount of open tasks that we have. Perfect. So now let's go with we'll need to do one more for close tags. Hey everybody, thanks for checking out the stream. So we'll do one more for the well, 2 more, excuse me. We'll do one for the close and progress. I'm sorry. Let's copy this and we'll paste it underneath here. And let's change this to closed. And we'll change this to, what we do, closed? No, it's closed. Sorry. Closed without the ED. There we go. And the last, and we'll change the colors later. I just want to get the functionality working first. And we'll do paste one more time, excuse me. Let's bring this down. And we'll change this to progress. Or maybe I'll say in progress. In progress, yeah. Is that enough space? Yeah. And I think this is just progress. Yep. Okay. All right. Perfect. Sorry. Dog is barking back there. All right. And let's see here. Okay. Do we want to change this right now? No, we'll keep this as is for right now. Make it a little, let me see, we'll go with margin right 1. I don't want to, it's going to irk me if it's not responsive or at least viewable on a small window, but I know this isn't so much for the CSS of it. But okay, we'll just keep this as is and I'll come back and probably change this. So maybe we'll just remove the in. And it shows a little better there. Well, actually, we can remove the task. I don't think we necessarily need it because it's already mentioned there. So we'll remove this. And we'll just go with users. We'll save it. Okay. All right, so we have the stats being displayed, and we also have the task being displayed here in a table that has the ability to be filtered. So now let's add a button that will represent a model, that will be a pop-up that will give us the ability to add new tasks, and we're going to use dasiyui to help us with that model so we don't have to write so much code. So let's go ahead and close the open windows out except for the page.js within the task directory. So within the components directory, let's add a new file called new task.js. And for right now, let's just go with use client and we'll go RFCE. Let's update the div to a section and we'll go new task. And I think what we'll do is let's just get it displayed on the screen. Sorry, that's the wrong one. We want there we go. And we'll add it in right here. Think. Yep. New task. Okay, so we see the new task button or words being displayed. So let's go within the new task page. And like I said, we're going to have a button that's displayed here. And once it's clicked, a pop-up model will show that will actually have the task display information. Let me see. So let's go with adding in a button underneath this, and we'll give it a class name of BTN, and we'll go new task. All right, so now we see we have the button from dasiyui, so we can remove this new task that's listed here. So if we go into dasiyui and let's look for a model, and we want to go with a model that has a close button in the corner. Yeah, we'll go with this one. So the JSX for it is listed here. So we actually can just copy this on-click method and paste it in here. And now let's just grab this dialog to make sure that it works, and we can close this back down because we should be good for right now. And let's paste it in, and we will add a form in just a moment. So let's just click, and we see that we have the model pop up, and it looks good. All of the information that we want is listed there, so perfect. So we can just close it out. So right here it has a form listed. So all we need to do is add in the content for our form. So let's start by importing some information that we're going to need. And the first thing that we want to bring in is we're going to use useState for this. So we'll go with useState. And of course, that's just going to help us capture the form information. And now we're going to bring in axios. And we're going to use, let's use router. This way we can, once the new information is created, the model will close and the page will automatically refresh. Without it, we'll have to manually refresh it, and that's just not a very good experience. And we also want to use the EasyMD editor from React. So all we need to do is take a look at the docs for it, and we'll need this information here in order to have the custom editor. And again, this isn't really relevant to the project. I just wanted to use a few different technologies versus the basic input fields that you get with from HTML. So we'll just add in these two imports so that we'll have access to the editor. And within the new task, let's go ahead and add in the functionality since I missed it just a moment. So let's add in const, and we'll call it task data, and we'll say set task data, and we'll set it equal to useState. You know, usually I would do these individually, but I figured it's easier just to do it a little different, learn a different way to do things, and you do whatever you're comfortable with. So we'll set it all within the useState. We'll go description, and then status, and TUS. And we want to start with open. Okay. Yeah, that looks good. Now underneath it, let's bring in the router, and we're going to say use router. And we'll go ahead and now we want to create the on-click function so that once we click the submit button within our form, it sends the information to our database. And we're going to add in the refresh so that the page reloads on its own. So we'll start by saying const handle, and we'll name this create task, and it's going to be a asynchronous function. So async, and within it we'll start with a try catch block as always, and let's capture the response first, and we'll set it equal to await and axios, and this is going to be a post request, mirroring what we did with Thunder Client. And the endpoint is going to be API / task. And we want to pass the object of task data that we created here. And let's just console.log task created. And we'll say response.data. This is just for troubleshooting purposes. I don't even have the console open to see it. So underneath the console, now we want to set the task. So we'll grab the second piece of our use state, and we'll say set task. And within it, we'll go title, and we'll go description, and we'll go status. And that's going to capture all of our form data. Yep. Okay. And underneath it, let's go router.push. And again, this is going to be to push it to a particular page. We can set it to whatever we want, but since this is our home page with our dashboard information, we're going to set it to /task. And underneath router.push, let's go document. We'll also need a way to close it out manually. Otherwise, this model will just remain open. I'm sorry, I want to explain that. So we'll go document.getElement and by ID. And the element ID that we want is the model close button, which is right here. So we want to get that element. So we'll go my_model_3, and then we'll use the .close method to close it out, not closet, close. .close, yep. And what we want is to refresh the screen so that the new information shows up. So we'll go window.location, and we'll go reload, and we'll close that function out like that. Okay, this looks pretty good. So now what we want to do is we want to pass in the data. We want to add a form, and we want to pass in the data through the form. So let's save this. What do we get in? Use router. Just use navigation. Yep. Okay. Boom. There we go. All right. And within the form, let's just make sure it's blank. Yep. And I'm going to remove that. This, I don't need that. And I don't want that either. So within the form, we're going to add in a few inputs, a few inputs. So the first one, I'll add a label here. And I'm not going to worry about the from portion or for portion, excuse me. I'm just going to add a label with a class name, and we're going to name it title. And underneath the title, we're going to add a input, and we'll add the closing tag here. So within the input, let's give it a class name. And now this styling is going to come from dasiyui. So make sure that you're using dasiyui if you want to follow this styling. Otherwise, style it however you like. We'll go input boarded and input primary. And I want the width to be full. And we'll go max width will be extra small. Okay. And we'll save it. We'll set the type to text. And the value is going to come from the task data. So we want to set it to task data dot title. And then now we'll need to create we'll need to leverage the submit functionality. So we're going to use a onChange method, and it's going to listen for a event. And once it gets the event, excuse me, sorry about that. We'll go E, and here we'll go set task data. Set task data, sorry. And we're going to destructure task data. Title will be e.target.value. Okay, let's take a look at it. It looks good. Task data title e.target.value. Okay, and let's see what this looks like. Okay, we'll go with it, and I may change that a little bit, but we'll worry about that in a moment. So now for the description, I'm going to add a div because I want to give it a little bit of margin bottom. MB, let's go with 2. And first we'll start with a label. And we'll go description. Yep. And we'll go class name here. And we'll go class name. Let's go margin right. What did we do for this one? Let's go 2. And we'll do it for this one as well. Margin right, that's 2. Now, underneath this label, we're going to use the simple MDE. And we'll add a closing tag. And right here, we're going to add a value of task data.descript. And we'll give it the onChange method as well of E. No, actually, this one is going to be the onChange of value. I'm sorry. Value. And then we'll give it the arrow. We'll say set task data. And destructure task data. Descript value. Looks like label is not defined. Label is not defined. Where did this come from? Oh, I made it capital. Duh. Sorry. That should be lowercase. Typing too fast. Sorry. And value is not defined because it should be. It should be E. Yeah, it should be E. Why did I put value? Let's go E. E.target.value. Let's see. We're getting the onChange event. There we go. All right, and we have the description listed there. So now let's add in a div, and this div will hold the select option. So we'll go margin bottom 4, and we'll have the label with a lowercase l this time. And we'll call this, well, we'll give a class name of margin right 2, and we'll call this status. And underneath the label, let's go with select. And our select, we're going to have some options. And we're going to have a value of open. And we want to make sure this works. We'll add 2 more. One will be for closed. And we'll do another one for progress. Okay. And with it, let's go to our button, and we'll need a submit button. So I think we'll throw it in a div as well. And inside of this div, we'll give it a class name of margin bottom 4. And we'll give it a button. And let's give it a little bit of styling, BTN dash. I think this one is, we'll do this one wide. And close it there. And we need to add the onChange event handler. Change. And no, I'm sorry. This isn't a change. This is a click. And this is the submit button, Jason. And so on click, we're going to do the function that we created, which is handle create task. Handle create task. And we'll just put create task here. Okay, so now let's save our information and take a look at it. Here is the new task button that we created, or new task form that we created. So we'll go new form 1, just creating, we got an error. Just creating our new form. And we'll change this to close. Now, what error are we getting? Cannot read the properties of value. That is at line 49. And what do we have at line 49? So we have our simpleMD description listed here. Let's see. We're going to go with, let's change this to onChange value. New form. Oh, still getting the error. What is it screaming about now? onChange value, it's still thrown off. Okay, because if we have this description, we don't need to label. We don't need to script it out like that because that value is already being captured. So we'll go value is equal to task data dot descript. And the onChange will be value equals set task data. Now let's save it. And I didn't add these select options as well. So we'll go class name here. We'll go select boarded, select small width full, max width equals, I want it extra small. And we'll do the value. And we'll set the value to task data dot status, and we'll do a onChange event handler. And and within that onChange, we're going to pass in the event, and we'll go set task data. Task data. We'll go status is e.target. Dot value. Okay, now let's save it, and let's go with test. No error that time. And let's go with progress. Create task, refresh. There we go. And if we click on open, we see the filter system still works. Progress, close, and we see the new task that we just created. And if we go to our database, let's refresh. And let's see what we got here. If we refresh, yep. Let's click on here and we have all 4 tasks. Okay, perfect. So now that we have our layout cared for on the main task screen, let's work on creating or updating, our single page view. And our single page view will also have it's going to also have the ability to update and edit tasks or delete tasks, So we'll work on that now. So we'll go back to, this is the home page, and we'll click on task to take us back to this window. So we'll have something on the screen, and let's close out these tasks or these page.js file task list. And let's just open the page.js file, that's within the ID/task directory that's inside of the app folder. And within it, we'll start with the basic layout. So the first thing I want to take care of here is the actual padding on the screen. So let's start by setting up our section. And let's go with a class name. We're going to give padding on the X of 4, padding on the Y of 8. Let's save it. And we see we have a little bit of padding right there. And next we'll want to, let's just bring in our imports. So we'll do use state, use effect, import axios, import use router, and it's next navigation, not router. And we'll need link, and we'll bring in the session just to make sure that our user SESSION from next off /react. Okay. So, and we'll talk more about those as we use it. But so now that we have our imports within the single task function, let's start by creating a use state variable named task. And we're going to add set task, and we'll set this state variable to null. After it, we want to bring in router, and this will obviously be from the use router hook. And finally, we'll need to bring in data, and this we'll be using the session and status from data just to help us identify that we have a authorized user. And let's see. Okay, so with that updated, we'll need a way to fetch the single task information. So let's create a variable named fetch data. And we want to pass in a task ID. And within this function, we want to make the axios request, excuse me, and in order to get the information, this will obviously be a GET request, and we'll send this GET request to the API/task/ passing in the dynamic, or passing in the ID that we get from the fetch task. Excuse me, so we're going to make this request to the API/task data/ID. And let's pass that in now. Oh, didn't need to do that. Didn't need that either. And similar to the previous request, then we'll pass the response we get back. We want to grab the state variable or the set task variable and assign it the response.data. And if we happen to get an error, we want to catch it, and we'll call it error. We'll pass in this error, and let's just console.error, and we'll just say error. Okay. All right, so now that we have the variable to fetch our data created, now we'll use it within the useEffect hook. So we'll say useEffect, and if the status is equal to authenticated, then we want to fetch the data. And remember, we're using the ctx params.id. Yep. And we want to pass back in the status and the ID, so the ID would come first. And this way we'll be able to use this information throughout the application, and it will pass in status, or throughout this page, I should say, excuse me. And underneath this useEffect hook, we're going to pass in, if we don't get an authenticated user, we'll need to send something back as well, because we're destructuring the use session object. So we'll say if the status is not authenticated, status is not authenticated, then we want to return a p tag, and we'll make it center not authorized. Okay. And while we're here, let's go ahead and create the handle delete function, because remember, on this page we're going to have a button to edit, which will take it to the edit page, and we'll also have the button to delete, but we can just go ahead and delete it from this window. So we'll create a variable named const handle delete task. Let's name it delete task, and we'll make it a arrow function, and this will be a axios delete request. There we go. And we'll use the backticks. We'll use API/task, and we'll make this ctx.params.id, and we'll do .then, and this will be, excuse me, we're not passing a response because we're deleting the task. So for this one, what we want is we want to push it back to the home page. So we'll say router.push, and we want it to, not home page, we want it to go to /task, which is where we have our dashboard. And if we get an error, we'll just catch the error. And we'll console.error. Okay, and finally we'll say if we don't get a task, let's just care for this. If no task, let's just return back to the browser a p tag with a class name of text center, and we'll just say loading task. Okay, so we have our functionality created. Now it's time to work on our JSX. So within the section tag, we can remove the word single. Let's add a H2 that reads single task, just to have a header on the page. And underneath it, let's add in a table. And within this table, we'll give it a class name of width of full. We'll give it a class name. We want the width to be set to full. Let's give it border. Actually, this one is just border collapse, PSE. And we'll give it a little bit of margin top. We'll save it. And within the table, we'll start with the table head. And we'll give it a table row. And the first header, we'll give it a class name of border. And we'll set the border to gray. And I think we had it at 300. Yeah, I think we want to keep it 300. And we'll set this one to title. Okay. And we can just copy this header. And we'll set the Actually, we're going to need one more because we're going to have a update header as well. We'll set this one to description. SCRIPTON. We'll set this one to status. And finally, the last one, last header, we'll set it to action. Okay, and outside of the closing header tag, we're going to add a T body or the table body, and we'll start with the table row. And within this row, we're going to pass in a key, and of course, it's going to be the task._id. And within the table row, we want to have the table details, and we'll give it a class name of border gray, and we'll set it to 300. And let's set the text to center, and we gave it some we gave it some padding on the y-axis. So right here, we want to pass in a little bit of JavaScript, and we're going to pass in task.title because that is the first header that we have listed here, and we see we're getting the information populated. Okay, and we're going to need 3 more of these. So we'll say the next one will be description, DESC. The next one will be status. Okay, and those popped in just fine. And finally, for the last one, let's remove the JavaScript within it. And we're going to pass in a link. And this is going to be the link to the edit page. We haven't created it just yet, but that's okay. And we can close this, and let's just put edit. And underneath this link, let's add in or link closing tag. Let's add in a button. And I'm just going to put delete. We'll add in the handler in just a moment. Yes, I know it's going to yell at me. So let's give it a href, the link that is. We'll pass in the backticks, and we want this to go to the task/edit/ID page. We haven't created it just yet, but we will in just a moment. ctx.params.id. And let's save it, and we're no longer getting yelled at by React. So now we'll give it a little class name for some styling. So we'll give it a background of gray 400. And on hover, we'll go background gray. Let's make it 500. Let's give it a little bit of padding on the Y. And for this one, I'll make the font medium. Let's save it. And you see that's what we get. So we'll give it a little bit of padding on the Y. Let's give it some padding on the X. Let's make it 4 and margin left of 2. Okay. And let's see, if we go to the task directory that's within that's not within the API folder. So close the API folder. If you go to the task directory, and within it, let's add a folder named edit. And within folder, let's add a page, or excuse me, another folder named bracket ID, open bracket ID, close bracket. And within it, let's add a file named page.js. And let's just add in some boiler code to make sure that it routes properly. We'll go RFCE, and we'll call this edit task. And we're going to change this to section tags. Let's make it edit task. Save it. And if we go back to localhost, it takes us to the edit task page. Great. So we'll go back. Now let's care for the delete functionality. So within the delete, let's give it the onClick method. Change this click. And within it, the onClick method that we want to pass is the handle delete task. So within the onClick, let's pass in handle delete task. And we'll give our button a little bit of styling. So we'll add a class name. We'll give it a background of red, and we'll make it 400. And on hover, we'll give it background red 500. Excuse me. And we'll add a little bit of padding on the Y of 2 to be consistent, and padding on the X of 4. And if we save it, let's go margin left 2. And we actually can remove this one. There we go. Okay. So we see that we now have our handle delete. And if we click the delete button, we see that the task is no longer listed there. So it appears that the handle delete task is working properly. So let's go back to, and we see that our stats database, yes, our database stats are updated. So if we go back to the next task that we have and we click on update, we see that it routes properly. So now let's click on edit. And once we update our edit page, we would have completed our exercise for today. So within the page.js that we just created, that's within the ID slash, that's within the edits slash ID directory within the task folder. Let's go ahead and go to that page.js file, and we'll start with our imports as always. Within this one, we're going to need use effect and use state. We're also going to need use router. We actually could have just copied from the previous file, but I'll just type it out really quick. We'll need axios. We're going to need import simple, let me see, simpleMD. This is the one with React. This should be it. I'll tell you what, we'll just grab it from to make it easier. We're going to need this one from the new task, what fit it. So we're going to need the router as well. We'll go ahead and grab that. And we'll need session, but we'll come back and add that in a moment. And yep, import use session from next React. There we go. All right. So with our imports there, I got use router twice. That's why. Okay. Use router. Okay, there we go. All right, and we'll close that. Now within the function, let's add the same use state of task data and that we had within our new task form. It's the exact same thing. And we actually can bring in router as well. And to save a little bit of typing. And we'll also bring in router from the use router hook. Okay. And now we're going to, now let's bring in the use session. And we want to destructure out the status and session. Let me put session first. Session, status, and we'll make it equal to use session. So we'll need a way to fetch the data first. So we'll go const fetch data. And we're going to pass in the task ID. And within the function, this is going to be a GET request to Axios, of course. We'll add in the backticks, and this is going to go to API/task/ID. Task ID. Then we're going to take back the response, and we'll assign it to the set task data use state response.data. And if we get a error, we want to catch it, and we'll just console it as usual. Console.error, and we'll set that to error. Now, underneath it, we'll need to utilize the useEffect hook. Let me see I'm getting the error. Oh, I forgot it's just that, sorry. And underneath it, let's save, make sure we're not getting yelled at by React. Okay, we're in good standing. All right, so first we'll create the useEffect hook to hook in the to fetch. So next we'll create the useEffect hook to fetch the data, assigning it and passing in the params ID. So we'll say useEffect, and within this we'll say if status is equal to authenticated, then we want to utilize the fetch data, and within it we're going to pass in the ID, params.id, and right here we'll pass in the ctx.params.id and also the status. And outside of this useEffect hook, let's add in a handle. Yes, we know. Let's add in a sorry, I forgot. We're getting an error that is not defined. Let's make sure we're passing that within the function. Sorry about that, which I'm glad I have it up live so we can see if we get an error real time. Okay, great. So with the useEffect hook cared for, now we just need to create the function to edit the task. And so we'll go const handle edit task. And of course, this is a asynchronous function. Make sure we're listening out for an event, and the event will be a submit, of course. And within a try catch block, let's add let response equal await. And this is, remember, we made this a put request to edit or to update a task. And we'll pass in the backticks, and this is going to go to API, excuse me, API task slash ID. So that's ctx.params.id. And we'll need to pass back the task data object. And then, of course, we'll just console.log task updated, because we want to see it updated on the screen. And in this one, we're not going to route back to the home page. I just want it, once we update the task, we're just going to have it there on the screen so that you can have it visual. And if you want to go back to the home page, you'll click on task. Otherwise, if you wanted to route back to the screen, you'll just do router.push, and then you'll have it go back to the /task endpoint. So underneath the catch, we're going to do a console.error, and we'll just pass in the error. All right, so we don't have any errors within our functionality. So now we'll just need to bring in our edit form. So within the section, let's give it a class name. And we'll just give a little bit of padding on the X, a little bit on the Y. We'll set the max width screen, and we'll set this to XL, and we'll set the margin to auto. We save it. We notice that we get a little bit of padding here, so that looks good. So we can remove the edit task that we have listed here. Let's add a form, and our form will get a class name, and we'll give it some padding on the Y of 4. And it will also have the onSubmit handler. We're going to use the handle edit task function within the form. And we'll start with a label, and we'll give it a title. And we'll say title within label, excuse me, and we'll set a little bit of margin to the right. I think we had this as 2, not 4. Okay. And if we save it, we see we have a title on the screen. So underneath the label, let's add in an input. And we'll start with the class name. We'll go input. and we'll go input boarded. We'll keep it similar to what we had on the new form page, and this input will be primary. We want the width to be full, and we'll give it a little margin bottom of 4. Let's save to see what it looks like. Okay, that looks good. Now we'll go type is text, and we'll give it a value of task data dot title. And we see test2 listed there, so we know that it's working properly. Remember, this is coming back from that task data object that we created. Then we'll give it the onChange handler or onChange method, and we're going to pass in an event. And with it, we're going to set the task data. And very similar to what we did previously, we'll destructure the task data, and we'll pass back the title, and we'll set it to e.target.value. Let's save it. Okay, no errors. This look good. Set task data. Okay, and underneath this input, let's add a div. Class name. We'll give it a margin bottom of 4, so there's a little bit of space. And here we're going to have the we're going to have the simpleMD right here. We can go ahead and close it, and within it we want to pass in a value first, and we'll pass the task data dot descript. Let's make sure we have something there. Great. We see we're getting test2, and we see the description. We see the simpleMD editor listed there. And for this one, we're not going to style it. We're just going to give it the onChange. And for this one, we'll need to pass in the value. And we'll go set task data, destructure the task data, and we'll say descript is equal to value. Okay, so underneath this div, all right, so now let's add in our select field. So underneath this div, let's add another div and give it a class name of margin bottom 4. And we'll start with a label. Not lavishly yours. A label, where that came from, of class name, and give it a margin right of 2. And we'll set this to status. And underneath this label, let's add in a select field. And let's save it so we'll see something on the screen. We'll go class name. Let's go select boarded, B-O-R-D-E-R-E-D. And we need, we want the select to be small and width to be full. All right, so that looks good. Now we need to pass in the value, and the value will be task data dot status. And then finally we'll pass, finally we'll pass in the onChange handler, and we'll set the task data within it. And remember, this will be destructured. We'll be destructuring it, and we'll be grabbing the status from this field, and it will be e.target.value. So let's save this. And now we'll pass in our options. So we'll say option of value. And remember, no, this is what we need. Open. And we'll just type in open. Save it. And we see we have open displayed. And we need 2 more. We'll need 1 for closed in progress. And we'll add progress and close. Okay, and outside of the closing div tag, and we can see we have the status updated here, so that's great. So finally, we need to add in the button to submit the request once we edit it. So we'll go class name, margin bottom of 4, and we'll just add a button. And we'll just say, we'll just name this update task. And inside the button, let's just give it a little bit of styling. We'll go BTN wide, and the type, WIDE, and the type will be submit, of course. Let's save it, and we see we have the update task button listed here. So if we update this to see if it works, let's just go -edit, and we'll just go -edit. Let's save it. We notice that the page refreshes and we see it still listed here. Let's change the status from closed to progress. Let's save it again, no errors. And if we go back to our home page or our task page, we notice that the title is now updated with the -edit. If we click on update, we see that the description is also updated as well with -edit. So, and we have our status updated as edit. So it appears that our task manager is working as designed. We have our stats being displayed on the task screen. We have the new task model that works. We have our task data listed here, and we see all of our tasks, which can be filtered by status. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, feel free to give me a like. Please subscribe. And also the full source code will be in the description. Any comments or suggestions, leave them below. Otherwise, I'll see you.